There are moments that define an entire life. Moments when the world splits into before and after, when a single choice echoes through every day that follows. For Gabriel Porter, that moment began with the sound of a gavel striking wood 3 times sharp as rifle shots in the frozen February air and the quiet sobbing of 3 children being sold like livestock in the town square of Silver Pine, Montana. The morning of February 14, 1889, arrived with the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. A thin layer of snow covered the wooden planks of the town square, trampled to brown slush, where 40 or 50 townspeople had gathered to watch what Raymond Hollister called a debt collection, but what everyone else knew was human tragedy dressed in legal language. The auction block, normally reserved for cattle and farm equipment, now held something infinitely more precious and infinitely more fragile. Billy Bennett stood at the center of the platform, 8 years old, but trying desperately to look older, trying to be the man his dead father would have wanted him to be. His right arm wrapped around his sister Emma, 5 years old, and silent as the grave, her eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see. In a wicker basket at their feet, 2-year-old Michael wailed for his mother, tiny fists reaching toward the woman being held back by 2 of Hollister's hired men at the edge of the crowd. Rachel Bennett struggled against their grip, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her dress torn at the shoulder where someone had grabbed her too roughly. She had been beautiful once, you could still see it in the bones of her face, but 6 months of widowhood and poverty and desperate fear had carved away everything soft, leaving only the terrible, fierce love of a mother watching her children being taken from her. Raymond Hollister stood beside the auction block like a ringmaster at a circus, his expensive coat buttoned against the cold, his face wearing an expression of regret that fooled absolutely no one who knew him. In his right hand he held a piece of paper, waving it for the crowd to see. $85, he announced, his voice carrying across the square with practiced ease. That's what Rachel Bennett owes me. 6 months of credit at my store, all documented, all legal. The law says a debt must be paid. So today, whoever gives me $85 walks away with all 3 of these children. Or, he paused for effect, letting the word hang in the frozen air. Separate bids are acceptable, whatever the market will bear. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed the careful blankness that comes from witnessing injustice and choosing to look away. A few showed something darker, a calculating interest that made Billy pull his sister closer. The boy's voice cut through the murmur, thin and trembling, but determined. Don't cry, Emma. I'll protect you. Always. Emma said nothing. She had stopped speaking 3 days after their father died in the mine collapse, stopped using words as if language itself had betrayed her. But she pressed against her brother's side, and her silence was louder than any scream. In the basket, Michael's wails reached a new pitch. Mama, Mama. Rachel's cry answered him raw and broken. Please, please, Mr. Hollister, I'll work. I'll do anything, just don't take my babies. Hollister didn't even look at her. The time for bargaining has passed, Mrs. Bennett. You had 6 months to make payments. You chose not to. That was a lie, and everyone knew it. Rachel Bennett had tried to pay, had offered him her late husband's tools, her small plot of land, with its valuable water rights, even her own labor. But Hollister didn't want payment. He wanted that land. And the quickest way to get it was to destroy the woman who owned it. 2 blocks away at the train station, where he had been sitting for the past hour, trying to decide his next move, Gabriel Porter heard the commotion. He had arrived in Silver Pine 3 hours earlier with $47 in his pocket, a leather bag of tools, and a wheelchair of his own design that represented 3 years of adaptation and survival since the war injury that had taken his legs, but not his will to live. The rejection still burned in his chest. Victoria Ashford's words still echoed in his skull. He could see her face as clearly as if she stood before him now. The way hope had transformed to shock to disappointment to that particular kind of pity that cuts deeper than any blade. She had been waiting at the station as planned, elegant in her fur-trimmed coat, a successful ranch owner who had corresponded with him for 3 months after seeing his response to her advertisement seeking a capable husband. Gabriel had been honest in his letters. He had described the injury, the wheelchair, his limitations. But he had also described his skills as a carpenter and mechanic, his literacy, his experience with machinery and construction. He had thought honesty would be enough. He had been wrong. Mr. Porter, Victoria had said, her voice carefully controlled, your letters mentioned an injury. I assumed you were recovering. I didn't realize it was permanent. The word permanent had fallen between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the small crowd that had gathered to watch the mail order meeting. Gabriel had kept his voice steady. My letters were clear, Mrs. Ashford. I've been in this chair for 3 years since the war. But I can work. I can build. I can provide everything you asked for in your advertisement. Everything except the ability to walk. She had tried to soften it, had reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, pressing it toward him with the kind of gentle firmness usually reserved for children or the mentally deficient. "For your return ticket. I'm sorry, I truly am, but I need a whole man." The crowd had gone silent at that. Some had looked away in embarrassment. Others had stared with the frank curiosity usually directed at accidents and fires. Gabriel had not taken the money, had simply turned his chair with practiced efficiency and wheeled away, leaving Victoria Ashford holding her $20 and her judgment. That had been 2 hours ago. Now, sitting at the edge of the train station platform, Gabriel was trying to calculate his options. $47 would buy him a return ticket to Colorado, with enough left over for a week in a boarding house while he looked for work again. The same cycle he had been trapped in for 3 years. Arrive somewhere new, find temporary acceptance, watch it evaporate the moment people realized the wheelchair was permanent. Move on. Repeat. He was so lost in this bitter arithmetic that he almost missed the sound of the crowd in the town square, almost didn't hear the gavel striking wood, almost didn't hear the child's voice begging, "Please don't separate us." Almost. But then he did hear it, and something in that child's voice cut through 3 years of careful emotional distance like a knife through thin ice. Gabriel had learned to protect himself, to keep his feelings contained, to survive by not caring too much about anything or anyone. It was the only way to endure the constant rejection, the perpetual reminder that he was less than broken, incomplete. But that child's voice broke through all of it. Gabriel rolled his chair down the wooden ramp he had spent an hour building that morning when he discovered the station steps were inaccessible. The station master had given him permission to use lumber from the maintenance shed, and Gabriel had constructed a proper ramp with calculated angles and reinforced stress points, the kind of practical engineering that came as naturally to him as breathing. The station master had watched with barely concealed amazement. Most people underestimated what Gabriel could do. He had learned to use that underestimation as a weapon. The crowd in the square parted reluctantly as Gabriel wheeled through. Some people stepped aside quickly, uncomfortable with proximity to disability. Others moved slowly, resentfully, as if his presence was an intrusion into something that wasn't his business. Gabriel ignored them all, his eyes fixed on the auction block and the 3 small figures standing there in the cold. Up close, the scene was even worse than he had imagined. Billy Bennett's face was pale with cold and fear, his jaw clenched so tight Gabriel could see the muscles jumping beneath the skin. Emma's silence had a weight to it, a presence that spoke louder than words ever could. And Michael's cries had taken on a desperate quality, the sound of a child who has been crying so long he no longer expects anyone to come. Rachel Bennett's eyes met Gabriel's across the crowd, and in them he saw something he recognized. The look of someone who has fought and fought and fought until there is nothing left the moment before surrender, when the last reserves of strength finally give out. He had seen that look in the mirror after Sarah died, after his son died, after the whole careful future he had planned disintegrated into grief and ashes. Raymond Hollister was still talking, his voice smooth and reasonable, as he explained the legality of it all, how debts must be paid, and the law was the law. And really, this was all very unfortunate, but necessary. A man near the front of the crowd, thick around the middle with the prosperous look of a successful farmer, raised his hand. "I'll take the boy," he called out. $30. Need a hand for the planting season." The words hung in the air for a moment, and then Billy's careful composure shattered. "No, please, please don't separate us. We have to stay together." Emma began to cry for the first time, tears streaming down her silent face. Michael's wails reached a new intensity. Rachel screamed something incoherent, still struggling against the men holding her back. And in that moment of chaos and heartbreak, Gabriel Porter made the decision that would define the rest of his life. "Stop." His voice cut through the noise, not loud, but carrying a quality of absolute command that came from 3 years in the Army before the injury. The crowd turned to look. Raymond Hollister's expression shifted from theatrical sympathy to genuine irritation. "This doesn't concern you, whoever you are. I'll buy them." The words came out before Gabriel had fully thought them through, before he could calculate odds or consider consequences. But as soon as he said them, he knew they were right. Knew them with a certainty he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. All 3. $85. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Michael stopped crying, as if sensing that something significant was happening. Hollister's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, and then something uglier. Calculation. He looked Gabriel up and down, his gaze lingering on the wheelchair with obvious contempt. "You a cripple wants to buy 3 children?" The word cripple hit like a physical blow, but Gabriel had been called worse. He kept his voice level. "I have $47 cash. I'll work off the remaining 38. But those children stay together." A murmur went through the crowd. Some faces showed approval, others showed doubt. Hollister's showed something close to amusement. "Work it off. Doing what exactly you can barely take care of yourself. I'm a carpenter and mechanic. I can build repair design. I'll work for anyone who needs it, but I'll pay that debt." Hollister studied Gabriel for a long moment, and Gabriel could see the thoughts moving behind his eyes. This stranger was offering to pay the same $85, which meant Hollister would get his money. But if Gabriel failed to pay the remaining 38, Hollister would get the children back, and potentially the land as well. It was a win either way. 2 weeks, Hollister said finally. "You have 2 weeks to pay the remaining $38. If you fail, I take the children back. And Mrs. Bennett," he turned to look at Rachel with undisguised malice, "you'll never see them again. I'll make sure they're sold to families in different states." The threat was clear. This was his one chance. Gabriel looked at the 3 children on the platform, at Rachel Bennett's tear-stained face, at the crowd watching with mixed expressions of sympathy and skepticism. He thought of Sarah, of the son he had never gotten to hold of the family that had been ripped away from him. He thought of the past 3 years of wandering and rejection and the slow erosion of hope. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, this was why he had come to Silverpine. Not for Victoria Ashford's conditional acceptance, not for a marriage based on utility and convenience, but for this, for 3 children who needed someone to fight for them, for a woman who needed someone to stand beside her, for a chance to prove that broken things could still be useful, that damaged people could still protect, that love mattered more than physical wholeness. Deal. Gabriel pulled the $47 from his pocket and held it up. Hollister descended from the platform and took the money, counting it slowly, deliberately, making sure everyone saw. Then he produced a receipt book from his coat, wrote out the transaction with flourished handwriting, and handed Gabriel a copy. 2 weeks, cripple. Clock starts now. Billy jumped down from the platform, first landing in the slush with a splash. But he didn't run to Gabriel immediately. Instead, he stopped about 3 feet away, his body tense, his face showing the wariness of a child who has learned that adults are not to be trusted. Emma climbed down more carefully, moving to stand behind her brother, using him as a shield. Rachel broke free from the men holding her and ran to her children, falling to her knees and pulling them close. Only Michael, too young to understand caution, reached his small arms toward Gabriel. Up, up. Gabriel rolled his chair closer, slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. He stopped at the same distance Billy had chosen, respecting the space the boy needed. "My name is Gabriel," he said quietly. "Gabriel Porter. I'm not going to hurt you, any of you." Billy's jaw was still clenched, his eyes searching Gabriel's face for signs of deception or cruelty. "Why did you do it? You don't even know us." It was a fair question. Gabriel considered several answers. He considered telling them about Sarah, about loss, about understanding what it meant to have everything taken away. But these children had their own grief, their own loss. They didn't need his story. They needed his certainty. Because nobody should be sold like cattle, and because families should stay together. "Are you going to hurt us?" The question came from Billy, but Gabriel could see the same question in Emma's wide eyes, in the way Rachel held her children closer. Gabriel looked at each of them in turn, making sure they saw the truth in his face. "No, son. I'm going to protect you. All of you." Something shifted in Billy's expression. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the first possibility of trust. The first crack in the wall that trauma had built. Emma's hand crept out from behind her brother to grip his sleeve. Rachel's tears had stopped, replaced by something Gabriel couldn't quite read. Relief, maybe, or fear that this was temporary, that hope was a trap. The crowd was beginning to disperse the show over, already moving on to the next piece of frontier gossip. Victoria Ashford stood at the edge of the square, watching with an unreadable expression. Judge Morrison, a heavy-set man in an expensive coat, leaned close to whisper something to Raymond Hollister that made both men smile in a way that promised nothing good. But Gabriel wasn't watching them. He was watching 3 children, and their mother, watching the way Billy still stood protectively in front of his siblings, watching the way Emma's eyes flickered between Gabriel and her brother, as if checking to make sure it was safe to hope. Watching the way Michael, with the fearless trust of the very young, reached out again. "Up, want up." Gabriel looked at Rachel, asking silent permission. She hesitated for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Gabriel scooped Michael into his lap, and the little boy settled immediately, his crying finally stopping, one small hand fisting in Gabriel's shirt as if anchoring himself to something solid. "We should go," Gabriel said. "Find someplace warm. Talk about what happens next." Rachel's voice was hoarse from crying barely above a whisper. "Mr. Porter, Gabriel, I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know where to begin." "You don't need to thank me. We'll figure this out together." Together. It was a word Gabriel hadn't used in 3 years. A word that implied partnership, shared burdens, mutual support. A word that suggested he wasn't alone anymore, carrying his grief and his disability like stones in a pack that grew heavier with each passing day. As they walked through the thinning crowd, Billy reached out and took Gabriel's hand where it rested on the wheel of his chair. The gesture was tentative testing, ready to pull back at the first sign of rejection. Gabriel's fingers closed gently around the small hand. "Where are we going?" Billy asked. Gabriel thought of his $47 now reduced to $0, thought of the 2 weeks he had to earn, 38 more, thought of the suspicious faces and the whispered judgments and all the ways this could fail. But he also thought of the weight of Michael in his lap of Billy's hand, in his of Emma's silence that might someday turn back into words of Rachel's exhausted hope. "Home," Gabriel said, even though he had no home to offer them yet. "We're going home." Behind them, Raymond Hollister watched them leave, his expression calculating. Judge Morrison stood beside him, and their conversation was brief but intense. Neither man looked pleased, and in that moment, though Gabriel didn't know it yet, the real battle was just beginning. Because a man like Hollister didn't accept defeat easily, and a judge who profited from Hollister's schemes wouldn't let a crippled stranger upset their careful arrangements. But that would come later. For now, there was only the moment. 4 people and a wheelchair moving through the frozen streets of Silverpine, Montana, toward an uncertain future. 4 people who had been broken by loss and poverty and cruelty, taking the first steps toward something that might become healing, might become family, might become home. The snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering their tracks as they went. The boarding house of Mrs. Kim sat on the eastern edge of Silverpine, where the town began to fade into open prairie. It was a narrow 3-story structure that had seen better days, its paint peeling its shutters, hanging slightly crooked, but there was something solid about it, something that suggested it would stand long after fancier buildings had collapsed. A hand-painted sign in the window read, "Rooms available," and below that in smaller letters, "All welcome." That last part was what mattered. In a town where Chinese immigrants were barely tolerated and often actively despised, where the recent Exclusion Act had made life precarious for anyone with Asian features, Mrs. Kim had learned to create space for those whom others rejected. The crippled, the widowed, the different. She charged fair prices and asked few questions and kept her judgments to herself, which made her boarding house a sanctuary for people who had nowhere else to go. Gabriel knocked on the back door. Rachel and the children clustered behind him in the fading afternoon light. The knock was answered almost immediately by a woman in her 50s, her gray-streaked hair pulled back severely, her face showing the kind of weathered strength that comes from decades of survival in a place that doesn't want you. Mrs. Kim looked at Gabriel's wheelchair first, as most people did, then at Rachel's torn dress and the 3 exhausted children, and finally at Gabriel's face. "You have money." Her English was precise, unaccented, the result of 30 years in America and a fierce determination to master the language of the country that barely acknowledged her humanity. Gabriel met her eyes steadily. "I have nothing, but I can work. I'm a carpenter and mechanic. I can repair anything you need fixed, and I'll pay rent as soon as I earn it." Mrs. Kim's expression didn't change. She looked past Gabriel to the children. Michael had fallen asleep against Rachel's shoulder, his face streaked with dried tears. Emma still hadn't spoken, but her eyes were watchful, calculating distances and escape routes, the way children learn to do when safety is never guaranteed. Billy stood protectively in front of his mother and siblings, his small body tense with readiness to fight or flee. "Ground floor room," Mrs. Kim said finally. "Back corner, $5 per week. I see you work first, then we talk about payment." Relief flooded through Gabriel so intensely it was almost painful. He nodded, not trusting his voice for a moment. "Thank you." Mrs. Kim stepped aside to let them enter. The hallway smelled of cooking oil and lye soap, and the particular scent of a building that housed many lives in close proximity. She led them down a narrow corridor to a room at the very back, unlocking it with a key from the ring at her belt. The room was small. A single bed with a threadbare quilt took up most of the space. There was a corner with fresh straw spread on the floor, a small table, 2 chairs with uneven legs, and a window that looked out onto an alley. It was Spartan and cold, and nothing like what any of them had lost, but it had 4 walls and a door that locked, and most importantly, it was theirs. Rachel stood in the doorway, Michael still in her arms, and something in her face finally broke. Not despair this time, but the opposite. The terrible weight of hope after believing hope was gone forever. "We can stay here." Mrs. Kim nodded once sharp and definite. "You can stay here." After Mrs. Kim left, closing the door quietly behind her, the 5 of them stood in the small room and looked at each other. The adrenaline of the morning was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Michael was still asleep. Emma sat down on the floor abruptly, as if her legs had simply stopped working. Billy remained standing, watching Gabriel with that same wary calculation. Gabriel wheeled himself to the corner with the straw. "You and the children take the bed. I'll sleep here." Rachel stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "But you're the one who paid. You saved us. You should have the bed." Gabriel began transferring items from his coat pockets, arranging his few possessions on the floor with careful precision. A knife, a small toolkit, a notebook and pencil, a photograph so worn the faces were barely visible. "I didn't pay to own you, Rachel. I paid so you could be free. There's a difference." The words hung in the cold air of the room. Rachel absorbed them slowly, testing them for hidden meanings or conditions. When she found none, tears began to slide down her face again, silent this time, the kind of crying that comes from deep relief rather than deep pain. Billy pulled his mother toward the bed, his child's face showing the kind of premature aging that comes from taking on adult responsibilities too young. "Mama, you need to sleep. You haven't slept in 3 days." Rachel let herself be led, sinking onto the bed with Michael still in her arms. Emma climbed up beside them, pressing close to her mother's side. But Billy remained standing, positioned between his family and Gabriel, as if his small body could serve as protection if this stranger turned out to be a threat after all. Gabriel pretended not to notice the defensive posture. He arranged the straw into something approximating a bed, then pulled his coat tighter around himself. The room was cold enough that he could see his breath, but he had endured worse. 3 years of learning to adapt meant he knew how to survive discomfort. "Mr. Porter?" Rachel's voice was quiet, not wanting to wake the younger children. "Gabriel, why did you do this?" "You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, staring at the photograph in his hand. The faces in it were too faded to see clearly, but he didn't need to see them. He had memorized every detail long ago. "I had a wife," he said finally. "Sarah. We married young before the war. She was everything good I knew about the world. When I came back from the war like this," he gestured at his legs at the wheelchair, "she never flinched, never looked at me different. She said I was still the same man, just in a different chair." He paused, his throat tight with the memory. "She died 2 years ago, childbirth. Our son died a few hours after her. I didn't even get to hold him before he was gone. I was still learning to walk on crutches, then still so useless I couldn't even carry my wife's casket." Rachel made a sound of pain empathy, cutting through her own grief. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss." Gabriel shook his head. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. When I saw your children on that auction block today, saw them being sold, being separated, I saw everything I lost, the family I should have had, the children I should have raised, and I thought maybe this is why I survived. Maybe this is why Sarah died, and I didn't. So I could be here today, so I could stop what was happening to you." Billy had slowly lowered himself to sit on the floor, no longer standing guard, but listening with the focused intensity of a child trying to understand adult pain. "Do you really think that—" Billy's voice was small, uncertain. "That sometimes bad things happen so we can help other people?" Gabriel looked at the boy, at his old young face, and chose honesty. "I don't know, son. Most days I think bad things just happen, and there's no reason for any of it. But today, right now, I'm choosing to believe it, because the alternative is believing my wife and son died for nothing, and I can't live with that." Something shifted in the room. Not trust yet, but the possibility of trust. The first crack in the walls that trauma had built around each of them. Michael stirred in his sleep, reaching out with one small hand. His fingers found Gabriel's coat sleeve and held on, and even asleep, the child seemed to relax at the contact. Emma watched this with wide eyes, processing the information that this stranger might be safe. Billy spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "My papa died 6 months ago. Mine collapsed in the Copper Ridge shaft. They brought him home, and he was already gone. Mama tried to keep going, but Mr. Hollister said we owed money, and he wouldn't give us more time. And then today he said he was going to sell us, and I tried to protect Emma and Michael, but I couldn't. I'm not strong enough." His voice broke on the last words, and suddenly he was crying, the kind of silent, desperate crying of a child who has learned that tears don't bring help. Gabriel's heart cracked open at the sound. He wanted to reach out to pull the boy close, but he held himself still, letting Billy choose. "You didn't fail, Billy. You survived. That's what protection looks like when you're 8 years old. You kept your brother and sister safe in the only ways you could. That's not failure. That's courage." Billy looked up through his tears. "But they were going to separate us. That man was going to buy me and send my brother and sister somewhere else, and I couldn't stop it. But someone did stop it. And now you don't have to protect them alone anymore. That's what adults are supposed to do. Share the weight. You carried it by yourself for too long." Something in Billy's face collapsed, all the forced maturity and premature responsibility sliding away to reveal the frightened child underneath. He scrambled across the floor and threw himself at Gabriel, wrapping thin arms around Gabriel's chest and crying into his coat. The sudden weight nearly knocked Gabriel from his chair, but he caught himself, one arm going around the boy's shaking shoulders. Emma watched this for exactly 3 seconds before she too slid off the bed and ran to them, her silent crying adding to Billy's sobs. She pressed against Gabriel's other side, her small body trembling. And then Michael woke up, saw his siblings, and crawled off the bed as well, somehow managing to climb into Gabriel's lap despite the tangle of children already there. He grabbed onto Gabriel's shirt with both fists and said one word: "Hug." So Gabriel hugged them. All three at once, his arms barely able to encompass them, all their tears soaking into his coat, their small bodies radiating the kind of desperate need that comes from months of fear and loss. He felt his own tears start hot against his cold face, and he didn't try to stop them. There was something sacred in this moment, something that felt like the pieces of broken things trying to knit themselves back together. Rachel watched from the bed, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of grief this time, but of something more complicated. Relief and hope and the terrifying vulnerability of watching her children trust someone new, of knowing that if this man turned out to be cruel or false, it would destroy them all. But looking at Gabriel's face, at the genuine tenderness in the way he held her children, at the tears on his own cheeks, she thought maybe this was real. Maybe this broken man with his wheelchair and his grief and his impossible gesture was exactly what they needed. Maybe broken things could protect other broken things. Maybe that's how healing worked. The moment stretched, suspended in the cold room like something precious and fragile. Then Billy pulled back slightly, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Are you really going to keep us? Even though you can't walk? Even though people will say things?" Gabriel looked at each child in turn, then at Rachel. "I'm going to try. I can't promise I'll succeed. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise I won't give up. And I can promise that if Judge Morrison or Ray Hollister or anyone else tries to take you away, they'll have to go through me first." Billy nodded slowly, processing this. Then he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He leaned forward and kissed Gabriel's cheek, quick and shy. "Thank you for buying us. Thank you for keeping us together." Gabriel's voice was rough when he answered, "You don't thank someone for doing the right thing, son, but you're welcome anyway." The morning came too soon and too cold. Gabriel woke to find all three children had migrated to the floor during the night, sleeping in a pile against his chair like puppies, seeking warmth. Rachel was awake on the bed, watching them with an expression Gabriel couldn't quite read. "They've never done that before," she whispered. "Not even with their father. They've never trusted someone so quickly." Gabriel carefully extracted himself without waking them. Children know things adults have forgotten. They can sense who's safe. Or they're so desperate for safety they'll take any kindness offered. It was a fair point. Gabriel wheeled himself to the window, looking out at the gray dawn. "I need to find work today. Real work. I owe Ray Hollister $38 in 2 weeks or he takes them back. And I need to prove to anyone watching that I can provide for them." Rachel came to stand beside him. "There's a blacksmith shop on 2nd Street, Marcus Webb. He's fair. Doesn't judge people. If anyone would give you a chance, it would be him." An hour later, Gabriel found himself outside Webb's smithy, watching through the open door as a large bearded man worked a piece of iron on an anvil. Marcus Webb was perhaps 50, built like an oak tree with the kind of steady competence that came from decades of skilled labor. He looked up as Gabriel's chair appeared in the doorway. "Help you. I need work. I'm a carpenter and mechanic. I can build repair design. I work fast and I work well." Marcus set down his hammer, studying Gabriel with frank curiosity. "You're the fellow from yesterday, the one who bought those kids." "Yes, sir." "That was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've seen in 20 years. Marcus paused. "Maybe both. Right now, I need it to be profitable. I owe Hollister money, and I need to earn it fast. Marcus walked over to a broken wagon wheel leaning against the wall. This wheel needs the iron rim refitted. The hub needs replacing. The spokes need to be tightened and trued. If you can fix it from that chair, you've got a job. Gabriel wheeled over to examine the wheel, running his hands along the damage calculating angles and stress points and the best approach to the repair. He looked up at Marcus. I'll need your tools, and 2 hours, but I can fix it. Marcus gestured toward his workbench. Show me. What followed was perhaps the most important 2 hours of Gabriel's life. He worked with focused intensity, demonstrating skills honed over years of necessity and adaptation. He removed the iron rim with careful leverage, replaced the damaged hub with one he fashioned from scrapwood, Marcus had, in the corner, tightened each spoke with mathematical precision, and reattached the rim so perfectly that Marcus tested it 3 times, spinning it on an axle, unable to find any wobble or weakness. Where did you learn to work like that? The Army taught me carpentry. Disability taught me innovation. When you can't do things the normal way, you learn to think different. Marcus grunted something that might have been approval. $1 a day, $7 a week. You work mornings. Afternoons, you're free to take other jobs, and I'll spread word that you're available for repairs. $7 a week meant $14 in 2 weeks. Not enough to pay Hollister, but a start. Gabriel would need to find additional work, take every job offered, sleep less, work longer, push himself harder than was sustainable, but he had pushed himself through worse. He had survived Sarah's death and his own injury and 3 years of wandering. He could survive this. Thank you, sir. Marcus returned to his anvil, but his voice carried over the sound of hammer on metal. Don't thank me. Do good work. That's all the thanks I need. Gabriel spent the rest of that first day learning the rhythm of Marcus's shop, the particular ways the older man liked things organized, the unspoken rules of the space. And between tasks, he listened to the gossip that filtered through. Silver Pine was a small town, and news traveled fast. By noon, everyone knew about the crippled stranger who had bought 3 children at auction. Opinions were divided. Some thought it noble, some thought it foolish, and some, if Marcus's reports were accurate, thought it suspicious. Ray Hollister's telling people you're either a saint or a predator, Marcus said during their lunch break. Says no normal man takes on 3 children he doesn't know unless he's got ulterior motives. Gabriel had expected this. People always assumed the worst when they couldn't understand kindness. Let him talk. I'll let my actions speak louder. When Gabriel returned to the boarding house that evening, exhausted but carrying the $1 he had earned and a loaf of bread Marcus's wife had sent for the children, he found Billy waiting on the front steps. The boy jumped up as soon as he saw Gabriel. You came back. There was such relief in those 3 words that Gabriel understood. Billy had spent the day half convinced that Gabriel would disappear, that this morning's safety would prove temporary, that abandonment was the only constant in life. I told you I would. I keep my promises, Billy. Billy walked beside the wheelchair as Gabriel approached the house. I taught Emma her letters today. Mama found some old newspapers in the trash, and we practiced. Emma wrote her name, first time since Papa died. Pride radiated from Billy's voice, the pride of a big brother who has helped his sister accomplish something difficult. That's good work, son. Real good work. They entered the boarding house together, and Gabriel was struck by how natural it felt, this child walking beside him, telling him about the day, looking for approval and guidance. How quickly humans adapted to new circumstances, how desperately children needed adults to depend on. Rachel and the younger children were in the room. Emma was indeed practicing letters on a scrap of newspaper, her small face serious with concentration. Michael played with a wooden horse someone had carved, making clip-clop sounds. Rachel was mending a shirt, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. They all looked up when Gabriel entered, and the room transformed. Michael abandoned his horse and crawled over at surprising speed, demanding to be picked up. Emma showed Gabriel her letters with shy pride. Rachel smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her, and it changed her whole face, revealing the woman she had been before. Poverty and widowhood had carved away the softness. How was your first day? Gabriel lifted Michael into his lap, studying Emma's careful letters. Good. Marcus Webb gave me work. It's not enough yet, but it's a start. You look exhausted. He was. His shoulders ached from the unfamiliar work, his hands were raw, despite gloves, and the winter cold had settled into his bones during the long wheelback from the smithy. But he had also felt useful for the first time in months, had felt the satisfaction of skilled work, completed well, had earned money through his own labor rather than through charity or pity. I'm fine. Tomorrow will be easier. That evening followed a pattern that would become routine in the days ahead. Simple dinners shared together, Billy helping Gabriel maintain his wheelchair, learning the mechanical principles that made it work. Emma showing off her expanding vocabulary of written words. Michael falling asleep in Gabriel's lap, while Rachel told stories of better times before her husband's death, when the future had seemed secure. Later, after the children were asleep, Rachel and Gabriel sat by the window in the near dark, speaking in whispers so as not to wake anyone. "Gabriel, I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right. Why are you really doing this? Is it just about your wife, about replacing what you lost?" Gabriel considered the question carefully. It deserved a real answer, not a comfortable lie. "Partly yes. When I saw your children yesterday, I saw the family I should have had. I won't pretend that's not part of it, but it's more than that too. It's about proving something, to myself, to everyone who's looked at this chair and decided I was useless. It's about showing that broken things can still be valuable, that damaged people can still protect, that love matters more than perfection." Rachel absorbed this, her face serious in the dim light. "That's a heavy burden to put on 3 children. I know. And if you think I'm doing this for the wrong reasons, if you think I'm using them to heal myself instead of actually caring about them, then tell me now, and I'll find another way to pay off your debt." "That's not what I'm saying." Rachel's hand found his in the darkness. "I'm saying I understand, because I'm doing the same thing, using your kindness to survive, using your strength because mine ran out, and I need to know if that's all right with you, if you're all right with us being broken too." Gabriel's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. "Rachel, we're all broken. That's not a problem. That's just the truth of being human. The question is whether we heal together or stay broken alone. I'd rather heal together." They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined, listening to the breathing of 3 sleeping children who had already endured too much loss. Outside the window, snow began to fall again, covering Silver Pine in white silence. And down the street, standing in the shadows between 2 buildings, Raymond Hollister and his hired man, Dwight Carson, watched the boarding house with expressions of cold calculation. 2 weeks, Hollister said quietly. "He's got 2 weeks to earn $38 and prove he can care for those brats. He won't make it. Nobody would hire a cripple for serious money." Dwight shifted his weight, uncomfortable in the cold. "And if he does make it," Hollister's smile was thin and cruel, "then we make sure he fails in other ways. There's more than one path to getting what I want. That land has water rights. I've waited 6 months for it. I can wait 2 more weeks. And when that cripple breaks his promise, when those children end up back on the auction block, I'll make sure they're separated so far apart they'll never find each other again. That'll teach that interfering bastard to mind his own business." They walked away into the snowy night, leaving no trace but footprints that would be covered by morning. Inside the boarding house, Gabriel felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, a premonition of trouble coming. But when Michael stirred in his sleep and reached for him with one small hand, Gabriel pushed the worry away. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, he had kept his promise. Tonight, 3 children slept safely. And for now, that was enough. The first week passed in a blur of work and adaptation, each day settling into a rhythm that began to feel almost like normalcy. Gabriel woke before dawn each morning, careful not to disturb the children who had taken to sleeping on the floor near his corner, as if proximity to him was a kind of security they needed more than comfort. He would wheel himself out into the frozen pre-dawn darkness and make his way to Marcus Webb's smithy, arriving before the forge was even lit, ready to begin the day's labor. The work was hard in ways that went beyond physical difficulty. His shoulders burned constantly from the repetitive motion of hammering and filing and lifting. His hands, despite the calluses he had built up over 3 years of wheelchair use, developed new blisters from gripping tools at unfamiliar angles. But there was satisfaction in it too, the deep animal pleasure of creating something useful with his own hands, of watching broken things become whole under his labor. Marcus was a good teacher-patient and exacting in equal measure. He showed Gabriel the particular ways that iron behaved under heat, how to read the color of heated metal to know when it was ready to work, how to strike the anvil with precise force to shape without destroying. And more importantly, he showed Gabriel respect, treating him not as a charity case or an inspiration, but simply as another craftsman learning the trade. By the end of that first week, Gabriel had earned $7. He took on additional work whenever he could find it, staying late at the smithy to repair tools for other townspeople, wheeling through the streets in the evening cold to fix a broken wagon axle, here a damaged fence post, there a window frame that wouldn't close properly. Every job brought him closer to the $38 he needed, but the mathematics were brutal. Even working every waking hour, taking every job offered, he had managed only $21 by the end of the first week. He needed 17 more in 7 days, and his body was already screaming for rest. But the physical exhaustion was easier to bear than it might have been because he came home each evening to something he had not expected. A family. Not the family he had lost, not a replacement for Sarah, and the son who had died too soon, but something new and fragile and precious in its own right. The routine they had fallen into was simple but profound. Gabriel would arrive at the boarding house as the winter sun was setting, his chair caked with mud and metal shavings, his clothes smelling of smoke and sweat. Billy would be watching for him from the window, and the moment Gabriel appeared, the boy would run outside, regardless of the cold, to walk beside the wheelchair as Gabriel approached. It was Billy's way of checking that Gabriel was real, that he had truly come back, that this new stability was not another cruel trick of fate. Emma had begun speaking again tentatively, at first single words that emerged like birds from hiding. Mama. Billy. Hungry. Yes. No. And then on the fourth day, Gabriel. She had said his name while showing him a picture she had drawn with a piece of charcoal on the back of a torn flour sack, a crude stick figure in a chair surrounded by 3 smaller figures. Family, she had said, pointing to the drawing. This is family. Michael, too young to understand the complexities of their situation, had adapted with the swift acceptance of the very young. He called Gabriel Gabe, unable to manage the full name, and demanded to be carried everywhere, despite Gabriel's limited mobility. Gabriel had fashioned a kind of sling that allowed Michael to ride on his lap while he wheeled, and the boy loved this, chattering constantly in his toddler language about everything they passed. Rachel watched all of this with expressions that cycled between gratitude and fear, relief and anxiety. Gabriel understood. She was watching her children attach themselves to a man who might fail, who might leave, who might prove unable to keep the promises he had made. Every time they called for Gabriel, every time they ran to him instead of to her, she was calculating the cost if this all fell apart. On the evening of the 7th day, after the children were finally asleep in a tangled pile of limbs and threadbare blankets, Rachel found Gabriel sitting by the window, as he often did, staring out at the snow-covered street. She sat down beside him close enough that their shoulders touched in the cramped space. Gabriel, her voice was barely above a whisper, I need to tell you something. He turned to look at her, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her hands twisted together in her lap. I'm listening. When James died, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me had already happened. I thought nothing could hurt more than watching them lower my husband into the ground while my children cried. But I was wrong. She paused, struggling with the words. The worst thing would be watching my children learn to love someone and then losing that person too. Watching them survive one abandonment only to face another. And Gabriel, they love you already, all 3 of them. In just 1 week, you've become essential to them, and that terrifies me. Gabriel absorbed this understanding, the truth beneath her words. She was not just talking about the children. She was talking about herself, too, about the way she had begun to depend on his presence, to plan her days around his return, to feel something she had thought was buried with her husband. Rachel, I can't promise I'll never fail. I can't promise nothing bad will happen, but I can promise I'm not going anywhere by choice. Whatever comes, we face it together. But what if together isn't enough? What if you can't earn the money in time? What if Hollister finds another way to take them? What if... He reached out and took her hand, stopping the spiral of fear. Then we fight, and we keep fighting. That's all anyone can do. They sat in silence for a moment, hands joined, drawing strength from the contact. And then, from the pile of sleeping children, came a small cry. Michael, caught in the grip of some nightmare, began to whimper, a sound that quickly escalated into frightened wailing. Both Gabriel and Rachel moved at once, but Michael's cry changed before they reached him. No longer an incoherent sound of distress, it resolved into a single word repeated over and over with desperate urgency. Papa! 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 The word hit Gabriel like a physical blow. He froze halfway across the room, his hands locked on the wheels of his chair. Rachel had stopped too, staring at the crying child with wide eyes. Michael was sitting up now, tears streaming down his face, his small body shaking. His eyes were open but unfocused, still trapped in whatever dream had frightened him. And he kept calling, kept reaching his arms out toward Gabriel. Papa! Want Papa! Gabriel completed the journey across the room, lifting Michael into his arms. The boy immediately buried his face in Gabriel's chest, his crying beginning to subside now that he was being held. Small fingers fisted in Gabriel's shirt, holding on with the desperate strength of someone who has lost too much and finally found something to cling to. I'm here, buddy. I'm right here. You're safe. Michael's crying slowed, hiccuping breaths, replacing the wails. And then, still mostly asleep, he mumbled into Gabriel's chest, Papa here. Papa stay. Gabriel felt his own eyes burning tears threatening to spill over. He looked up and found Rachel watching him, her face wet with tears of her own. Behind her, Billy had sat up, awakened by the commotion, and even Emma's eyes were open, watching the scene unfold. Billy spoke into the silence, his voice carrying a question that went far beyond the literal meaning of the words. "Michael called you Papa." Gabriel swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. "He's little. He doesn't understand. He just needs someone to feel safe with. But do you want to be our Papa?" The question hung in the air, enormous in its implications. Gabriel looked at Billy's serious face, at Emma, watching with careful intensity, at Michael already drifting back to sleep in his arms, at Rachel, whose expression was impossible to read. "Yes," Gabriel said, the word coming out rough with emotion. "If that's what you want, if that's all right with your mother, then yes, I want that more than anything." Billy nodded slowly, processing this. Then he lay back down, pulling Emma close to him, in the way he always did, the protective big brother, even in sleep. But just before he closed his eyes, he said something so quietly, Gabriel almost missed it. "Good, because we want that too." Gabriel sat holding Michael long after the boy had fallen back into peaceful sleep, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had allowed this moment to happen. Rachel finally came to sit beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "They chose you," she whispered. "In their hearts, you're already their father." "And what about you?" Gabriel asked, turning to look at her. "What am I to you?" Rachel's hand moved from his shoulder to his face, her palm warm against his cold cheek. "You're the answer to a prayer I was too exhausted to speak. You're the possibility of a future I thought was dead. You're—" Whatever she was about to say was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Both of them froze. Visitors at this hour were never good news. Gabriel handed Michael carefully to Rachel and wheeled to the door, opening it to find Mrs. Kim standing in the hallway, her face grave, holding an official-looking envelope. "This came for you. Special delivery from the territorial office." Gabriel took the envelope with a sense of foreboding. The paper was thick, expensive, marked with the seal of Montana Territory. He opened it slowly, unfolding the single sheet inside. As he read, he felt the careful hope of the past week crumble like ash. "What is it?" Rachel's voice was tight with fear. Gabriel read the letter aloud, his voice flat with shock. "To Mr. Gabriel Porter, we have received a formal complaint from Mrs. Victoria Ashford and Mr. Raymond Hollister regarding the welfare of 3 minor children currently in your care. The complaint alleges that you, as a physically disabled individual, lack the capacity to provide adequate care, shelter, and supervision for said children. A hearing has been scheduled for February 28, 1889, at 10 o'clock in the morning at the Silver Pine Courthouse. Judge Samuel Morrison presiding. At this hearing, you will be required to demonstrate your fitness as a guardian. Failure to appear, or to satisfactorily prove your capability, will result in the children being removed from your custody and placed in the care of the Montana Territorial Orphanage, or with approved foster families. Signed, Helena Blackwell, Director, Montana Children's Welfare Society. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children, somehow sensing the shift in atmosphere, remained still and quiet. 10 days, Rachel whispered. "They're giving us 10 days. "It's the same day the debt comes due," Gabriel said, understanding flooding through him. "They planned this. If I can somehow earn the money, they have a backup plan. They'll take the children through the courts instead." Billy had sat up again, his face pale. "They're going to separate us. They're going to send us away." Emma began to cry, silent tears tracking down her face. Michael, picking up on the distress around him, started to whimper. Rachel pulled her children close, trying to comfort them, while her own face showed barely controlled panic. A second knock at the door revealed Marcus Webb, his large frame filling the doorway. He looked at the letter in Gabriel's hand, and his expression darkened. "You got it then. I tried to get here first, but they must have sent it straight over. You knew about this." Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Heard about it an hour ago at the saloon. Hollister was buying drinks, celebrating. He was telling anyone who would listen about how he's going to get those kids back, and that land to boot." Marcus's voice was bitter. "And Gabriel, you need to know something else. Judge Morrison, the man presiding over your hearing, he's Hollister's oldest friend. They served in the war together. Morrison owes Hollister money, favors God knows what else. That hearing is rigged before you even walk into the courtroom." The words landed like blows. Gabriel had known from the beginning that Hollister was ruthless, but he had not fully grasped the extent of the man's reach, the depth of his connections. To have the judge himself compromised meant the legal system, the very structure that was supposed to protect the vulnerable, had been corrupted into a weapon. So what do we do? Rachel's voice was steady despite the tears still wet on her face. We can't just give up. We can't let them win. Mrs. Kim, who had been standing silently in the doorway, spoke up. You fight, but you fight smart. You need witnesses, people who will testify that Gabriel is a good father, that the children are thriving. You need evidence, documents, anything that proves he can provide for them. Marcus nodded agreement. I'll testify. So will my wife. We've seen Gabriel work. We've seen him with those kids. Any honest person would know he's fit to raise them. But will honest testimony matter if the judge has already decided? Gabriel's voice was bleak. If Morrison is in Hollister's pocket, he'll rule against us no matter what evidence we bring. Maybe, Marcus conceded. But we make enough noise, bring enough witnesses, make it public enough, and even a corrupt judge has to think twice. Silver Pine's a small town. People talk. If Morrison rules against you, when everyone can see you're doing right by those kids, his reputation suffers too. It was thin hope, but it was hope nonetheless. Gabriel looked at Rachel, at the three children huddled close to her, at Billy's frightened face, and Emma's silent tears, and Michael's confusion. He thought about the letter in his hand, about the hearing 10 days away, about Judge Morrison and his predetermined verdict. He thought about all the ways this could fail, all the paths that led to those children being ripped away from the fragile family they had started to build. And then he thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made to himself at her grave, that he would find purpose again, that he would prove his life still mattered, that brokenness was not the same as worthlessness. All right, he said, his voice gaining strength. We fight. Marcus, I need you to talk to everyone you know. Find people who will testify. Mrs. Kim, we need character witnesses, people who've seen how the children are doing. Rachel, can you get documentation, school records, if there are any medical records? Anything that shows the children are healthy and cared for. Rachel nodded determination, replacing fear on her face. There's a teacher, Miss Harrison. She's been tutoring Billy and Emma in the afternoons. She could testify about their progress. Billy spoke up, his voice small but fierce. Gabriel, will you really fight for us? Even if the judge says no, even if everyone says you can't. Gabriel wheeled his chair closer to the children, looking each of them in the eye. Billy, look at me. I will fight every single day if that's what it takes. You, Emma, Michael, you're my family now, and I don't give up on family, ever. Billy absorbed this, then did something that surprised everyone. He stood up, walked to Gabriel, and wrapped his arms around him in a fierce hug. You're not like other grown-ups, Billy said into Gabriel's shoulder. You don't lie. You don't make promises you can't keep. That's why we trust you. Gabriel's arms came up around the boy, holding him close. I'm going to do everything in my power to keep that trust, son. I promise you that. Emma crossed the room and joined the embrace, her small arms barely able to reach around both Gabriel and her brother. Michael, not wanting to be left out, scrambled over and climbed into Gabriel's lap, completing the circle. Rachel watched with streaming tears, but these were different tears than before, not despair, something closer to fierce determination. After Marcus and Mrs. Kim left to begin gathering support after the children had finally been settled back to sleep, with repeated reassurances that everything would be all right, Gabriel and Rachel sat together in the darkness. The weight of what they faced pressed down on both of them, but there was something else there too, a sense of unity, of shared purpose, of two broken people finding strength in each other. Tell me the truth, Rachel said quietly. What are our chances? Gabriel considered lying, considered offering false comfort, but she deserved honesty. If Morrison is as corrupt as Marcus says, not good. Even if we bring 50 witnesses, even if we prove beyond doubt that the children are thriving, he can still rule against us. And there's no appealing a territorial judge's decision not quickly enough to matter. So we could do everything right and still lose them. Yes? Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then we make sure we don't lose, whatever it takes. If the law won't protect them, we find another way. There was something dangerous in her voice, something that suggested she had moved past fear into the territory of desperate action. Gabriel understood. He had been there himself in the days after Sarah died, when grief had made him capable of things he would never have considered in calmer times. Rachel, we need to be careful. If we do something illegal, something violent, we make it easier for them to take the children away. And if we do nothing, they take them anyway. At least this way we fight. She had a point, but Gabriel could see the path she was suggesting, could see how quickly justified anger could become destructive rage. He had walked that path after Sarah died, had stood at the edge of that abyss, and nearly jumped. Only the knowledge that Sarah would have been disappointed in him had pulled him back. We fight smart, not hard. We use their own systems against them. We find the cracks in their armor, and we exploit them. But we do it legally, publicly, in a way that makes them the villains and us the victims. That's how we win. Rachel nodded slowly, accepting this, even if she didn't entirely believe it. And if that doesn't work, then we have a backup plan, but let's try the right way first. Outside the window, unnoticed by either of them, a figure stood in the shadows between buildings. Dwight Carson had been sent to watch the boarding house to report on the cripple's reaction to the legal threat. He had heard enough through the thin walls to know that Gabriel Porter was planning to fight, that he had allies willing to support him, that he was not going to surrender easily. Dwight turned and walked back toward the saloon where his employer was waiting. Raymond Hollister looked up as Dwight entered, his face flushed with whiskey and triumph. Well, how did the cripple take the news? He's planning to fight. Got Marcus Webb and that Korean woman helping him gather witnesses. Hollister's smile didn't waver. Let him fight. Let him bring all the witnesses he wants. Morrison will rule my way regardless, and even if by some miracle the cripple wins in court, well, he paused to take another drink, there are other ways to solve problems, ways that don't require a judge's approval. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Dwight shifted uncomfortably. Boss, if something happens to those kids or that cripple, people will know it was you. People can know whatever they want. As long as they can't prove it, I don't care. That land has water rights worth 10 times what those brats are worth. I've been patient for 6 months. My patience is running out. Back at the boarding house, Gabriel lay awake long after Rachel had gone to bed, staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios in his mind. 10 days to prepare a legal defense against a rigged system. 10 days to prove he could care for children when half the town agreed with Victoria Ashford that a man in a wheelchair was inherently unfit for fatherhood. 10 days to fight against money and connections and prejudice so deeply rooted that it shaped the very laws meant to protect the vulnerable. But he had faced impossible odds before, had survived a war that killed half his unit, had rebuilt his life after an injury that should have left him helpless, had wheeled away from Victoria Ashford's rejection and found something better than what he had been seeking. The sound of a child's breathing reached him from across the room. Michael, lost in dreams, mumbled something incoherent. Billy shifted in his sleep, one protective arm still draped over Emma, even unconscious. And Rachel, exhausted by fear and hope in equal measure, finally slept. Gabriel made a decision then, in the darkness of that cramped room with its threadbare blankets and cold floor. He would not let these children be taken. Not by Hollister's greed or Morrison's corruption or society's prejudice. He would fight with every tool at his disposal, would call in every favor, would sacrifice whatever was necessary. Because they had called him Papa. Because they had chosen him. Because love, real love, was stronger than any law, any judge, any system built by broken people trying to maintain control. I'm coming for you, Hollister, Gabriel whispered into the darkness. And you're going to learn that the most dangerous thing in the world is a broken man with something to protect. The snow continued to fall outside, covering Silver Pine in silence. And in that silence, battle lines were being drawn for a war that would determine the fate of 3 children who had already lost too much. 10 days until the hearing, 10 days to build a defense, 10 days to prove that wholeness had nothing to do with the body and everything to do with the heart. The fight was just beginning. The next 7 days moved with the terrible speed of water flowing toward a waterfall each hour, bringing them closer to the hearing that would decide everything. Gabriel threw himself into preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsession, working through exhaustion and pain, refusing to acknowledge the limits of his body because acknowledging limits meant accepting the possibility of failure. Marcus Webb became his general in this campaign, using his decades of standing in Silver Pine to gather allies. The blacksmith spoke to shopkeepers and farmers, to the preacher and the doctor, to anyone who had witnessed Gabriel's care for the children or his skill as a craftsman. Most were sympathetic, some were willing to testify. A few brave souls agreed to stand against Judge Morrison's known prejudices and speak truth in a courtroom where truth was not guaranteed to matter. Dr. Henry Walsh was the first to commit. He was a thin man in his mid-40s who had seen too much frontier suffering to waste time on social niceties. When Marcus brought Gabriel to his office on the second day after the letter arrived, Walsh examined the children with methodical thoroughness, documenting their health with the kind of detailed precision that made him respected even by those who disliked him. "These children are thriving," Walsh said as he wrote his notes, his pen scratching across expensive paper. "Billy has gained 4 pounds in 2 weeks. His color is good. No signs of malnutrition or neglect. Emma is speaking again, which her mother tells me she had not done since her father's death. That alone is evidence of psychological improvement. And the little one, Michael, he shows all the signs of a secure attachment. He's bonded to you, Mr. Porter, in the way children bond to primary caregivers." Gabriel watched as Walsh wrote his medical opinion carrying weight that mere observation could not. "Will you testify to this at the hearing?" Walsh set down his pen and looked at Gabriel directly. "I will. And I'll tell Morrison to his face that any judge who removes healthy, happy children from a competent guardian solely because that guardian uses a wheelchair is a fool and a bigot. I don't care whose friend he is." It was a small victory, but victories were measured in inches now, rather than miles. Each witness secured felt like a brick added to a wall they were building against Hollister's assault. Miss Catherine Harrison, the schoolteacher who had been tutoring Billy and Emma in the afternoons, agreed to testify about their academic progress. She was a severe woman in her 30s, unmarried and sharp-tongued, the kind of person who had no patience for injustice dressed up as law. "Billy Bennett is reading at a level 2 years above his age," she told Gabriel when he came to her small schoolhouse on the third day. "And he's teaching his sister with remarkable patience. Emma is catching up quickly despite months of trauma-induced silence. These are not neglected children, Mr. Porter. These are children who are finally receiving the stability and love they need to heal." Father Thomas O'Brien, who ran the small Catholic church on the edge of town, had seen Gabriel and the children at Sunday service. Rachel had insisted they attend despite Gabriel's discomfort with organized religion, arguing that public displays of normal family life would help their case. The priest had noticed how the children stayed close to Gabriel, how Billy helped him navigate the steps, how Michael sat in his lap throughout the sermon, babbling quiet commentary that Gabriel patiently whispered answers to. "The measure of a man is not in his legs but in his heart," Father O'Brien said when Gabriel asked if he would testify. "I'll speak to that in court. God knows Morrison needs to hear it." But for every ally gained, they discovered an enemy entrenched. Victoria Ashford had been busy during those days as well, speaking to her own network of wealthy landowners and businessmen, reminding them of Gabriel's disability, questioning his motives, suggesting dark implications about why a single man would take in 3 children. Her rejection of Gabriel had transformed into something more toxic, a need to justify her initial judgment by proving him unworthy after all. She convinced the banker Harold Stevens to testify that Gabriel had no steady income and insufficient funds to provide long-term care. She persuaded Adelaide Morton, the president of the Ladies' Auxiliary, to speak about the impropriety of an unmarried man caring for young children without female supervision. She built her case brick by brick using respectability and prejudice as mortar. The town began to divide along fault lines that had always existed but had been politely ignored. Those who believed in rigid social hierarchies sided with Victoria. Those who valued compassion over convention leaned toward Gabriel. And those who owed money or favors to Raymond Hollister stayed carefully neutral, not wanting to risk his vindictive wrath. Rachel worked her own kind of battle during those days, gathering documentation with fierce determination. She found receipts from the times James had bought goods from Hollister's store, proving the debt claimed was inflated. She located the deed to her small piece of land, understanding now that the land itself was what Hollister truly wanted. She wrote letters to James's former employers at the mine requesting character references that might speak to her own reliability as a mother. And she watched her children with an aching awareness that every moment might be one of their last together. Billy's careful questions about what would happen at the hearing. Emma's increasing clinginess, as if she sensed the threat, even if she didn't fully understand it. Michael's innocent joy, unaware that the man he called Papa might be forced to give him up. On the 5th day after the letter arrived, something happened that changed the trajectory of everything. Emma fell ill. It started with a cough that Rachel initially dismissed as a common cold, nothing more than the usual result of winter's grip on Montana. But by evening the cough had worsened, each breath coming with a rattling wheeze that made Rachel's face go pale with recognition and fear. "I've heard this sound before," she whispered to Gabriel as they stood over Emma's small form on the bed. "When James's brother died, pneumonia, it took him in 3 days." Gabriel felt ice settle in his stomach. Pneumonia was a death sentence for many on the frontier, especially for children whose bodies were still recovering from months of stress and inadequate nutrition. He wheeled immediately to the door. "I'm getting Dr. Walsh. Stay with her, keep her warm." The journey through the dark streets to Walsh's house took less than 10 minutes, but felt like hours. Gabriel pounded on the door with enough force to wake the entire block, not caring about propriety or disturbing the peace. Walsh appeared in his nightshirt, took one look at Gabriel's face, and grabbed his medical bag without asking questions. Back at the boarding house, Walsh examined Emma with the same methodical care he had shown during his earlier visit. But now there was urgency beneath the calm professionalism. He listened to her chest with his stethoscope, counting her breaths, feeling her forehead for fever. Emma's eyes were glazed with illness, her small chest working hard with each inhalation. Early-stage pneumonia, Walsh confirmed, his voice grim. Possibly bronchitis. Hard to say at this stage, but she needs constant care. Warm liquid steam to help her breathe, cold compresses for the fever. Someone needs to watch her every hour through the night. I'll do it, Gabriel said immediately. Walsh looked at him, measuring. Mr. Porter, you've been working 16-hour days for a week. You're exhausted. Your body needs rest, or you'll collapse. I'll rest when she's better. For the next 2 days, Gabriel barely slept. He kept vigil by Emma's side, helping Rachel administer the medicines Walsh had left, holding cool cloths to the girl's burning forehead, talking to her in low, steady tones, even when she was too feverish to respond. Billy stayed close, too, holding his sister's hand, singing the songs their mother had taught them when they were even smaller. It was during one of these long nights, when Emma's fever had spiked dangerously high, and her breathing had become so labored that each breath sounded like a battle, that something broke in Billy. The boy had been strong through everything, had carried burdens no 8-year-old should bear, had protected his siblings with a fierce determination that bordered on heroic. But watching his sister struggle to breathe, hearing her whimper in fevered delirium, finally shattered his careful control. "This is my fault," Billy sobbed, his face buried in Gabriel's shoulder. "I should have kept her warmer. I should have given her my blanket. I should have protected her better." Gabriel held the boy close, one arm around Billy's shaking shoulders, while his other hand continued to bathe Emma's forehead with cool water. "Billy, listen to me. This is not your fault. Sickness happens. It's not because you failed. You've been the best big brother anyone could ask for. But what if she dies? What if she dies like Papa died, and it's because I wasn't good enough? Then it still wouldn't be your fault. But she's not going to die. Dr. Walsh is the best doctor in Montana. We're doing everything right. And Emma is strong. She's a fighter just like her brother." Billy cried himself into exhausted sleep against Gabriel's side, while Rachel maintained her own vigil on Emma's other flank. And sometime deep in that longest night, when the fever finally broke and Emma's breathing began to ease, when the immediate crisis passed and they could breathe themselves again, Rachel looked across her daughter's sleeping form at Gabriel and spoke words that had been building for days. "I love you." The words were simple, unexpected, profound. Gabriel's hands stilled on the cloth he was folding. "Rachel, I know this isn't the time. I know we have the hearing in 3 days and everything is uncertain, and maybe I shouldn't say this now. But watching you these past 2 nights, watching how you care for my children like they're your own, watching you sacrifice your health and your rest and everything you have, I realized I don't want to wait to tell you. Because if something happens, if Morrison rules against us and they take my babies away, I want you to know. I want you to know that somewhere in all this pain and fear, I found something I thought I'd never have again. I found love." Gabriel reached across Emma's sleeping form and took Rachel's hand. "I love you too. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you fighting for your children at that auction. I just didn't have words for it yet." They stayed like that through the remainder of the night, hands clasped across their daughter's bed, speaking in whispers about a future that might never come, planning for possibilities that required them to win a battle stacked against them. But for those few hours in the darkness before dawn, they allowed themselves to hope. The morning brought unexpected visitors. Marcus Webb arrived first, his face grim, followed closely by Father O'Brien, whose expression suggested he bore bad news. "It's started," Marcus said without preamble. "Hollister's making his move." He explained quickly. During the night, someone had broken into Dr. Walsh's office and destroyed his medical records. The detailed notes Walsh had made about the children's health were gone. Without those records, Walsh's testimony would be reduced to memory and opinion rather than documented fact. Miss Harrison's schoolhouse had been vandalized as well, her carefully kept records of Billy and Emma's academic progress torn and scattered. And perhaps most damaging, Harold Stevens, the banker, had suddenly reversed his position. Where before he had been willing to remain neutral, he was now claiming publicly that Gabriel had tried to bribe him for favorable testimony, a complete fabrication, but one that carried weight because it came from a respected businessman. "Hollister's covering his tracks," Gabriel said, understanding the strategy immediately, destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses, creating false accusations. He's making sure that even if we get to court, we have nothing concrete to present. "There's more," Father O'Brien said quietly. "Victoria Ashford came to see me yesterday, asked me not to testify. Said it would be better for everyone if the children were placed with a proper family, that I was enabling a dangerous situation by supporting you." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her to examine her conscience. I told her that Christ spent his ministry standing with the rejected and the outcast, and if she couldn't see that in you and those children, then she had forgotten everything her own faith taught her." The priest paused. "She didn't take it well. But Gabriel, she's wavering. I saw it in her eyes. The certainty she had when she rejected you at the station, it's cracking. She's starting to question whether she made the right choice." It was the first piece of genuinely good news they had received in days. If Victoria could be convinced to withdraw her support from Hollister's case, it would significantly weaken his position. But there was no time to pursue that possibility now. The hearing was 3 days away. Emma was still recovering, and the evidence they had worked so hard to gather was being systematically destroyed. That afternoon, while Rachel stayed with the children, Gabriel made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. He wheeled himself directly to Raymond Hollister's store, entering through the front door as customers paused to watch. Hollister looked up from behind his counter, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by a smile that contained no warmth. "Well, the cripple comes to beg." "I'm not here to beg. I'm here to make you an offer." Hollister gestured for his customers to leave, waiting until the store was empty before responding. "I'm listening." "You want Rachel's land, the water rights. That's what this has always been about. So here's my offer. I'll convince Rachel to sell you the land at a fair price. You drop the custody case. Everyone wins." Hollister laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Why would I take that deal when I can have the land and the satisfaction of watching you fail?" "When that hearing happens in 3 days, Morrison will rule exactly how I've told him to rule. Those brats will be taken away. Rachel will have no choice but to sell the land to cover her remaining debts. And you'll be exposed as the fraud you are, a cripple playing at being a father." Gabriel had expected this response, had known Hollister's cruelty went beyond mere financial gain into something darker, a need to punish those who defied him. But he had needed to hear it, needed to confirm that there was no compromise possible, no peaceful resolution. Because what he did next required absolute certainty that Hollister deserved what was coming. "Then I'll see you in court, and may God have mercy on you, because when this is over, I won't." The threat was delivered quietly, without theatrics, but something in Gabriel's eyes made Hollister's smug expression falter for just a moment. Then Gabriel turned his chair and rolled out of the store, leaving Hollister standing alone among his dishonestly gained merchandise. Outside, Gabriel found Victoria Ashford waiting by her horse, clearly having watched him enter the store. She looked different than she had at the train station 2 weeks ago. The certainty had drained from her face, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like doubt. "Mr. Porter, Gabriel, I need to speak with you." "Then speak." She struggled for words, her patrician composure cracking. "I made a mistake. At the station. When I rejected you. I thought I was being practical, protecting myself from a bad situation. But I've been watching you these past 2 weeks. Watching how you care for those children. How you work. How you fight. And I've been questioning whether I judged you by the wrong standards. Is this where you apologize? I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't forgive myself. But I want you to know I'm withdrawing my support from Hollister's case. I'll tell Judge Morrison I was wrong, that you're fit to be a father." It was a significant concession, but Gabriel found he had no capacity left for gratitude. "That's good, but it may not be enough. Hollister has Morrison in his pocket. Unless you can prove Morrison is corrupt, your change of heart might not matter." Victoria's expression shifted, something calculating entering her eyes. "What if I could prove it? What if I had evidence that Morrison and Hollister have been colluding for years?" Gabriel's full attention locked onto her. "What kind of evidence? Letters? Financial records? I invested with both of them 5 years ago in a mining venture. It failed, but I kept copies of all the correspondence. Some of it shows Morrison making legal rulings in Hollister's favor in exchange for money. I never used it because I was part of the scheme too. But if it means keeping those children with someone who loves them," she trailed off, the implication clear. She was offering to expose herself, to destroy her own reputation, to burn down the careful social standing she had spent years building, all to make right the wrong she had done to Gabriel and the children. "Why?" Gabriel asked. "Why would you do this?" Victoria looked away toward the mountains visible in the distance. "Because I was wrong about what makes a person whole, and because those children called you Papa. I heard Michael say it in church last Sunday. And the look on your face when he did? I've never had that. Never had anyone look at me with that kind of love. And I realized I threw away the chance for something real because I was too afraid of what people would think." She pulled an envelope from her coat and handed it to Gabriel. "These are copies. The originals are in a safe place. If Morrison rules against you, I'll release everything. It will end his career, and probably Hollister's too." Gabriel took the envelope, understanding the weapon he now held. "This could destroy you as well." I know, but some things are worth destroying yourself for. You taught me that, Mr. Porter, whether you meant to or not." She mounted her horse and rode away before Gabriel could respond, leaving him holding evidence that might save his family or might simply drag them all down together. As he watched her go, he understood that the battle was shifting. They were no longer fighting just in a courtroom. They were fighting for the soul of an entire town, for the question of whether justice could exist in a system designed to protect power rather than truth. 3 days until the hearing. 3 days to prepare for a war that would determine everything. Gabriel rolled his chair back toward the boarding house where his family waited, where Emma was recovering, and Michael was playing, and Billy was trying so hard to be brave. 3 days to prove that love mattered more than law, that wholeness came from the heart, not the body, that broken things could still be beautiful if someone was willing to see them clearly. The fight was no longer just beginning. It was entering its final desperate phase. And Gabriel Porter, the rejected mail-order groom who had been dismissed as half a man, was about to show Silver Pine, Montana, exactly what a whole man could do when everything he loved was at stake. The night before the hearing arrived with a silence that felt ominous, the kind of quiet that precedes storms. Gabriel should have been sleeping, saving his strength for the battle ahead, but sleep was impossible. He sat by the window of their small room, watching the empty street outside, while behind him Rachel and the children slumbered in exhausted peace. Emma's breathing had finally returned to normal after her illness, but the scare had taken years off all their lives. The town hall where the hearing would take place sat 3 blocks away, its outline visible against the night sky. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Judge Morrison would hear arguments about whether a man in a wheelchair could be trusted with 3 children. Tomorrow, everything Gabriel had fought for over the past 2 weeks would be decided by a corrupt judge in the pocket of a vindictive man. The evidence Victoria had provided lay hidden beneath the straw in his corner insurance that might save them or might simply go down with them when they fell. A movement in the street below caught his attention. 2 figures moving through the shadows with the careful deliberation of men who did not want to be seen. Gabriel recognized them immediately. Dwight Carson Hollister's hired enforcer and another man whose face was hidden by a hat pulled low. They moved toward the far end of town, toward the cluster of buildings that included the courthouse and the small Methodist church that stood beside it. Something cold settled in Gabriel's gut. He watched as the 2 men paused near the church, looking around to ensure they were unobserved. One of them, Dwight, was carrying something, a can of some kind. And suddenly, Gabriel understood with terrible clarity what was about to happen. They were going to burn the courthouse, burn it before morning so the hearing could not take place. Or worse, they were going to set the fire so it would happen during the hearing itself, trapping everyone inside. Either way, Hollister's plan was moving beyond legal corruption into something far more dangerous. Gabriel moved without conscious thought, wheeling himself away from the window and across the room. He shook Marcus Webb, who had taken to sleeping on the floor near the door as additional protection just in case Hollister tried something direct. "Marcus, wake up! They're going to burn the courthouse." The blacksmith came awake instantly, his soldier's reflexes still sharp despite decades of peace. "You sure? I saw Dwight and another man. They had kerosene cans. They're at the church now." Marcus was on his feet, immediately pulling on his boots. "We need more men. Can't stop them alone. No time. If we raise the alarm, they'll hear us coming and set the fire anyway. We have to go now." They left the boarding house together, Gabriel pushing his chair hard through the frozen mud of the street while Marcus loped beside him. The winter night was bitter cold, every breath visible as fog, every sound carrying too far in the still air. As they approached the courthouse square, they could see the glow of a lantern near the church's back entrance. The 2 figures were still there working at something. Gabriel and Marcus split up without needing to discuss it. Marcus circled around to approach from the north, while Gabriel continued straight ahead using the darkness and his wheelchair's near silence to get close. As he drew nearer, he could hear voices low and urgent. "Just pour it around the foundation. When the hearing starts tomorrow, I'll come back and light it. The whole building will go up in minutes." That was Dwight's voice, and the casual way he discussed mass murder made Gabriel's blood turn to ice. How many people would be in that courthouse tomorrow? 30-40. And Hollister was willing to kill them all just to avoid losing custody of 3 children and a piece of land. Gabriel rolled out from the shadows, his voice cutting through the night. "Step away from the building." Both men spun around Dwight's hand, going immediately to the gun at his belt. His companion, whose face Gabriel could now see, was a drifter. Hollister must have hired someone with no connection to the town and no reason to refuse whatever money was offered. "The cripple," Dwight said, his voice carrying a mixture of surprise and contempt. "You should be home, Porter. This doesn't concern you." You're about to murder half the town. That concerns me plenty." Dwight's hand tightened on his gun. "Nobody's going to die if everyone stays smart and stays away. This is just insurance. Hollister wants to make sure things go his way tomorrow." "By burning down a courthouse full of people. By burning down an empty courthouse before people arrive. The hearing gets postponed. Gives us more time to handle things properly." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The kerosene was already spread. One spark and the old wooden structure would be an inferno. And Gabriel understood now that Hollister had moved beyond caring about appearances or consequences. This was the action of a desperate man who had realized he might lose. Marcus emerged from the shadows behind the two arsonists, his blacksmith's hammer held ready. "Drop the gun, Dwight, and you, whoever you are, step away from that kerosene." The drifter looked at Dwight, waiting for direction. Dwight's face cycled through several expressions before settling on something cold and resolved. His gun cleared the holster in a smooth motion, but he did not point it at Gabriel or Marcus. Instead, he aimed it at the trail of kerosene that led to the church's foundation. "You shoot me. I drop this gun. It fires into the kerosene. Whole place goes up. You want that on your conscience, blacksmith." It was a stalemate, the kind of moment where violence and destruction hung in perfect balance, waiting for someone to tip the scales. Gabriel's mind raced through possibilities, calculating angles and distances, and the terrible mathematics of how many seconds it would take for a gun to fire versus how long it would take him to cover the ground between them. And then a voice cut through the tension, a woman's voice carrying authority and something that sounded like regret. "Dwight Carson, you put that gun down right now, or so help me God, I will destroy you myself." Victoria Ashford stepped into the lantern light, her expensive riding coat dusted with snow, her face showing the kind of determination that came from finally choosing a side after too long sitting on the fence. She was not alone. Behind her came Father O'Brien and Dr. Walsh and Miss Harrison, and a dozen other townspeople, all roused from their beds by Victoria's midnight ride through Silver Pine, all coming to stand witness. Dwight looked at the growing crowd, at the faces of people he had known for years, at the way they looked at him now with disgust and disappointment. Something in his face cracked the bravado draining away to reveal the tired man underneath. "Mrs. Ashford, this isn't your concern. It became my concern when I realized what Hollister was planning, when I understood that I had helped create this situation by being too proud and too stupid to see what was right in front of me." Victoria moved closer, her voice gentling slightly. "Dwight, you're not a murderer. You're a man who made bad choices working for a bad man. But you can choose differently right now. You can choose to be better than what Hollister wants you to be." The gun wavered. Dwight's hand was shaking, whether from cold or fear or the sudden weight of conscience, Gabriel could not tell. "He'll kill me. If I don't do this, if I turn on him, Hollister will kill me." "No, he won't," Marcus said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty of a man who had seen real violence and knew how to stop it. "Because you're going to testify against him. You're going to tell Judge Morrison everything, every bribe, every threat, every illegal thing Hollister has done, and then you're going to leave Silver Pine and never come back. That's your only way out of this sun, the only way that doesn't end with you hanging or spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." The silence stretched. The crowd watched, breath held, waiting to see which way this moment would break. And then Dwight lowered his gun, his shoulders sagging with defeat or perhaps relief. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. But you have to protect me until I do. Hollister has other men. He'll come for me the moment he knows I've turned." Father O'Brien stepped forward. "You can stay at the church tonight. I'll keep watch. And tomorrow you'll speak the truth and let God sort the rest." The drifter Hollister had hired took this as his cue to run disappearing into the darkness before anyone could stop him. Let him go, Gabriel thought. They had what they needed, a witness with first-hand knowledge of Hollister's crimes. Combined with Victoria's evidence, it might be enough to not just win the custody case, but to destroy Hollister completely. Marcus and several other men set about cleaning up the kerosene, working quickly to prevent any accidental ignition. Victoria approached Gabriel, her face showing exhaustion and something that might have been the beginnings of redemption. "I'm sorry, for all of it, for judging you, for helping Hollister, for being so blind." Gabriel looked at her, this woman who had rejected him 2 weeks ago, who had called him incomplete, who had set in motion the chain of events that had led to this moment. He could have hated her, part of him wanted to, but hate was exhausting, and he had no energy left for it. "You chose right in the end. That's what matters. Is it? I wonder if choosing right after choosing wrong for so long actually counts. Ask me again after tomorrow. If we win, if those children stay with me, then yes, it counts." They dispersed slowly, people returning to their homes with the kind of nervous energy that comes after a crisis averted. Gabriel and Marcus made their way back to the boarding house, where Rachel waited in the doorway, having been woken by the commotion. Billy stood beside her, his young face tight with worry. "What happened?" Gabriel told them, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Emma and Michael. Rachel's face went through several emotions as she processed the information, finally settling on something like despair. "So even now, even with Dwight's testimony and Victoria's evidence, we still have to face Morrison in court. We still have to trust a corrupt judge to do the right thing." "Yes. And if he doesn't..." Gabriel had been trying not to think about that possibility, but Rachel deserved honesty. "Then we appeal. We take it to the Territorial Supreme Court. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." "And how long does that take? Weeks, months? Where do the children go while we fight?" It was the question Gabriel had been dreading. If Morrison ruled against them tomorrow, despite all the evidence, the children would be taken immediately, placed in the territorial orphanage or with foster families, while the legal process ground forward at its glacial pace. By the time any appeal was heard, months would have passed. Billy and Emma and Michael would have been separated, sent to different families across Montana. The damage would be irreversible. Billy had been listening to all of this with growing distress. Now he spoke up, his voice small and frightened. "Gabriel, are they going to take us away tomorrow, even after everything we did?" Gabriel wanted to lie, wanted to promise everything would be fine, that they would stay together no matter what. But Billy deserved the truth as much as Rachel did. "I don't know, son. I'm going to fight with everything I have, but I can't promise we'll win." Billy absorbed this, his 8-year-old mind trying to process the injustice of a world where doing right did not guarantee victory. Then he did something that broke Gabriel's heart and put it back together in the same moment. He walked over to Gabriel's chair and climbed into his lap, pressing his face against Gabriel's chest. "If they take us away, will you come find us? Will you keep fighting even if it takes forever?" Gabriel's arms came around the boy, holding him close. "I will search until my dying breath. I will fight until there is no fight left in me. I will never stop trying to bring you home. That's a promise, Billy. One I will keep even if it costs me everything." Rachel knelt beside them, her arms going around both Gabriel and Billy, and then Emma woke and wandered over sleepily, adding herself to the embrace. Michael, never one to miss out on affection, climbed down from the bed and joined the pile, his small voice asking what was wrong. Why was everyone crying? They stayed like that for a long time, a family holding each other against the possibility of being torn apart. And in that moment, Gabriel understood with painful clarity that this was what love meant. Not the romantic notion of finding your perfect match, not the easy comfort of people who fit together without effort, but this, the desperate, fierce determination to protect people who had become essential to your existence. The willingness to burn down your own life if it meant keeping them safe. The understanding that you would rather face any hardship together than experience any pleasure alone. "I love you," Gabriel said to all of them, to Rachel and Billy and Emma and Michael. "I love you all so much it scares me, because love means you can lose things, and I don't know if I could survive losing you." "You won't lose us," Billy said, with the fierce certainty of a child who had not yet learned that determination did not always overcome circumstance. "We're a family. Families don't break." But Gabriel knew better. He had learned in the hardest way possible that families could break, that love was not armor against loss, that sometimes the universe took away the things you treasured most and gave you no say in the matter. He had buried Sarah and his infant son. He had spent 3 years learning that lesson over and over again. But he had also learned something else, that broken things could be repaired, that new families could be built from the wreckage of old ones, that choosing to love despite the risk of loss was the bravest thing any human could do. "You're right," he said to Billy, choosing to believe it because the alternative was unbearable. "Families don't break. No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what Judge Morrison rules, we are a family, and nothing can change that." The night slowly gave way to dawn, the sun rising over Silver Pine with indifferent beauty. In just a few hours, they would walk into that courthouse and face the judgment that would determine their future. Gabriel had his witnesses lined up. He had Victoria's evidence tucked safely in his coat. He had Dwight Carson's promised testimony. He had done everything he could possibly do to prepare. But as he looked at the 3 children who called him Papa, at the woman he loved, at the family that had formed from desperation and chance, and the willingness to fight for each other, Gabriel understood that preparation was not the same as guarantee. Today they would either win everything or lose everything. There would be no middle ground, no partial victory, no compromise. The fight had been building for 2 weeks. Now, finally, the moment had arrived, And Gabriel Porter, the rejected mail-order groom who had been dismissed as broken and insufficient, was about to walk into a courtroom and prove that love was stronger than law, that wholeness came from the heart, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room was a broken man with something to protect. The sun climbed higher, the town began to wake, and in the small boarding house room, a family prepared for the battle that would define the rest of their lives. Whatever happened in that courtroom, whatever Judge Morrison decided, they would face it together, because that was what family meant, and some truths were worth fighting for, even when victory was far from certain. The Silver Pine Courthouse was packed long before 10 o'clock arrived. Word of the hearing had spread through town like wildfire, fed by whispers about the attempted arson, about Victoria Ashford's change of heart, about the crippled stranger who had dared to challenge Raymond Hollister's carefully constructed power. People filled every bench, lined the walls, crowded into the doorway. Some came out of genuine concern for the children's welfare. Others came for the spectacle, for the frontier entertainment of watching the powerful brought low or the vulnerable crushed depending on which way the wind blew. Gabriel wheeled into the courtroom, with Rachel walking beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder. Billy held Emma's hand on his other side, the boy's face set with a determination that made him look far older than his 8 years. Michael rode in Gabriel's lap, thumb in mouth, sensing the tension around him, but too young to understand its source. They took their seats at the front, Gabriel positioning his chair at the defendant's table, a piece of furniture that had been built with standing men in mind, but which he had learned to navigate regardless. Judge Samuel Morrison entered from his chambers with the ponderous dignity of a man accustomed to being the most important person in any room. He was large, red-faced, with the kind of prosperity that came from years of taking more than his share. His eyes swept over the packed courtroom with satisfaction, a politician's pleasure at having an audience. When his gaze landed on Gabriel, something flickered across his face. Contempt, perhaps, or the certainty of a man who had already decided the outcome and was merely going through the motions of justice. Raymond Hollister sat at the prosecutor's table with his lawyer, a thin man from Helena, who had a reputation for winning cases through technicality and intimidation. Hollister's face showed smug confidence, the expression of a man who had bought his victory in advance and was simply waiting to collect. Morrison's gavel came down with a crack that silenced the murmuring crowd. This hearing is called to order. We are here to determine the fitness of Mr. Gabriel Porter to serve as guardian to 3 minor children, namely William Emma and Michael Bennett. The petitioners, Mrs. Victoria Ashford and Mr. Raymond Hollister, claim that Mr. Porter's physical disability renders him incapable of providing adequate care. Mr. Porter contests this claim. We will hear testimony from both sides, and I will render judgment. The prosecutor stood arranging his papers with theatrical precision. Your Honor, the case is simple. Mr. Porter is confined to a wheelchair. He cannot run if the children are in danger. He cannot perform the physical labor necessary to provide for a family. He cannot offer these children the stable, normal home environment they deserve. The petitioners are merely concerned citizens acting in the children's best interest. It was smoothly delivered, reasonable sounding, the kind of argument that would resonate with anyone who had not actually watched Gabriel over the past 2 weeks. Gabriel felt Billy tense beside him, felt the boy's hand grip his arm with desperate strength. Your Honor, may I speak? Morrison looked surprised that Gabriel had a voice at all. This is not a trial, Mr. Porter. You'll have your chance to present witnesses. Then I'd like to call my first witness, Billy Bennett. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Morrison's face showed irritation. The boy is 8 years old, hardly a credible witness. He's the person most affected by your decision, Your Honor. I think he deserves to be heard. Morrison looked ready to refuse, but Father O'Brien stood up in the gallery, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. Judge Morrison, surely even in your court a child has the right to speak about his own future. The challenge was unmistakable. Morrison's face darkened, but he gestured curtly. Very well, the boy may speak, but keep it brief. Billy stood and walked to the witness chair, his small form almost comically dwarfed by the furniture designed for adults. He had to sit on the very edge to keep his feet from dangling. Gabriel watched the boy's face, saw the fear there, but also something else. A strength that had been forged in fire, tempered by loss, and now ready to be tested. The prosecutor approached his smile condescending. Billy, do you understand what's happening here today? Yes, sir. You're trying to take me and my sister and brother away from Gabriel. From Mr. Porter, you mean. And we're not trying to take you away. We're trying to make sure you have a proper home. Tell me, has Mr. Porter ever hurt you? No, sir. Has he been able to care for you adequately, feed you, keep you warm? Yes, sir. Better than anyone ever has. The prosecutor's smile tightened slightly. But Billy, Mr. Porter cannot walk. Surely that limits what he can do for you. What if there was an emergency? What if you needed help? and he couldn't reach you." Billy's jaw set, and Gabriel recognized the expression. It was the same look the boy had worn when facing down the crowd at the auction, when protecting his siblings despite being terrified. "Sir Gabriel reached me when no one else could. When I was on that auction block and that man wanted to buy just me and send Emma and Michael away, Gabriel stopped it. When Emma got sick and needed medicine and watching all night, Gabriel did it, even though he was so tired he could barely stay awake. When I needed someone to tell me I wasn't a failure for not being able to protect my family, Gabriel was there." The boy's voice was gaining strength, the words coming faster now. "You talk about what Gabriel can't do because of his chair, but you don't see what he can do. He fixed Mrs. Miller's roof. He built the ramp at the train station that helps other people in wheelchairs. He works harder than any man in this town because he has to prove himself every single day to people like you who think being in a chair makes him less." Billy turned to look directly at Judge Morrison, his 8-year-old face showing a courage that made the packed courtroom hold its collective breath. "Gabriel is my papa. He chose us when no one else wanted us. He loves us not because he has to, but because he wants to. And if you take us away from him, you're not protecting us, you're destroying us." The silence that followed was absolute. Several people in the gallery were crying openly. Rachel had her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Even Morrison looked shaken, his certainty cracking slightly in the face of a child's raw honesty. Gabriel felt his own tears spill over, unable to stop them, not wanting to. He had been called many things in his life. Soldier, craftsman, cripple, broken. But Papa, that word spoken with such fierce conviction by this brave child, meant more than any other title he had ever held. The prosecutor, sensing he had lost this round badly, tried to recover. "Your Honor, the boy is clearly attached to Mr. Porter, but attachment is not the same as proper care. We have witnesses who will testify that, actually—" Victoria Ashford's voice cut across the courtroom as she stood. "I would like to withdraw my petition against Mr. Porter." Hollister surged to his feet. "What, Victoria, we discussed this. You agreed. I agreed when I thought I was doing the right thing. I was wrong. I have spent 2 weeks watching Gabriel Porter prove himself to be a better man than most of the able-bodied men in this town. I rejected him because I thought his disability made him insufficient. But the insufficiency was mine, not his." She walked forward, pulling an envelope from her coat. "Your Honor, I have here documentation of financial dealings between yourself and Mr. Hollister, bribes paid in exchange for favorable rulings, cases decided before they were heard, a pattern of corruption spanning 5 years. The courtroom erupted. Morrison's face went from red to purple, his gavel pounding uselessly against the wave of noise. "Mrs. Ashford, you are in contempt of this court. No, Your Honor, you are in contempt of justice, and I'm done being complicit in it." Before Morrison could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and Father O'Brien entered with Dwight Carson between him and Dr. Walsh. Dwight looked haggard, his face showing the strain of a sleepless night and the weight of conscience finally acknowledged. "Your Honor," Father O'Brien said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "Mr. Carson has testimony relevant to these proceedings." Dwight approached the bench, his hands shaking. "Judge Morrison Raymond Hollister hired me to intimidate witnesses, to destroy evidence. Last night he ordered me to burn down this courthouse to prevent this hearing from happening. I was going to do it. I was going to kill people just so Hollister could steal a piece of land from a widow." Hollister stood, his face twisted with rage. "That's a lie. This man is a criminal, a liar, trying to save himself." "I have proof," Dwight interrupted. "Letters from Hollister, payment records, names of other people he's hurt or threatened. I'll testify to all of it. I'll confess to everything I've done, because I'm done being the kind of man who hurts children to make a rich man richer." The courtroom dissolved into chaos. People were shouting, some calling for Hollister's arrest, others demanding Morrison step down. The judge's gavel pounded repeatedly, uselessly, as the carefully constructed system of corruption collapsed around him. In the midst of the chaos, Gabriel felt small hands grip his arm. Emma had climbed into his lap next to Michael, her face buried in his chest. Billy stood pressed against his side. Rachel's hand found his shoulder, gripping tight. And in that moment, surrounded by the noise and fury of justice finally breaking through years of rot, Gabriel understood that they had won. Not because of the evidence or the witnesses, though those had mattered, but because enough people had chosen to stand for what was right, even when it cost them something. Morrison tried one more time to maintain control. "Order, I will have order in this court." But Father O'Brien's voice rose above the din, calm and implacable. "Judge Morrison, you have a choice. You can rule fairly on this custody case and resign your position voluntarily, or we can take all of this evidence to the territorial capital and let them investigate. Either way, your career as a judge is over. The only question is whether you leave with some dignity intact. The silence that followed was charged with potential violence. Morrison's hands gripped the bench so hard his knuckles went white. His face cycled through rage, fear, and finally a kind of exhausted defeat. He looked at Gabriel, at the children clustered around him, at Rachel's protective stance, and something in his expression shifted. I rule in favor of Mr. Porter. Full legal guardianship of William Emma and Michael Bennett is hereby granted to Gabriel Porter, with Rachel Bennett as co-guardian. Mr. Hollister's claim to the property in question is void, all debts are forgiven, and this court is adjourned. The gavel came down one final time, and the courtroom exploded with noise. Some people cheered. Others shouted questions. Marcus Webb let out a whoop of victory. Mrs. Kim, standing at the back, allowed herself the smallest smile. And Hollister, seeing everything he had schemed for collapse in ruins, tried to bolt for the door. He did not make it far. Several townsmen, including farmers whose debts Hollister had used to extort labor, blocked his path. The sheriff, looking uncomfortable but finally forced to act, placed Hollister under arrest for attempted arson and conspiracy. Dwight Carson was arrested as well, though his cooperation would earn him a lighter sentence and the chance to start over somewhere far from Montana. Morrison stepped down from the bench without another word, his career and reputation destroyed by his own corruption. The man who had held so much power just an hour ago was now just another disgraced official, his authority evaporated like morning mist. Gabriel barely registered any of it. His world had narrowed to the children in his arms, to Rachel's hand on his shoulder, to the simple, impossible fact that they had won. They were a family, legally, permanently. No one could take that away now. Billy was crying great heaving sobs of relief and joy. Emma clung to Gabriel's neck, her small body shaking. Michael, not understanding the details but sensing the emotion, patted Gabriel's face with one chubby hand. "Papa, my papa." Rachel knelt beside the wheelchair, her arms going around all of them, and they stayed like that while the courtroom slowly emptied around them, while people congratulated them or simply filed out to spread the news through Silverpine. They stayed locked together, a family that had been forged in fire and tested by corruption and had somehow impossibly survived. Later, there would be paperwork, legal formalities, arrangements to be made. But for now, there was only this. The five of them whole in ways that had nothing to do with bodies or ability, complete in ways that transcended law or custom. Victoria Ashford approached tentatively, her face showing something that might have been peace or might have been the beginning of it. "Mr. Porter? Gabriel, I hope someday you can forgive me for the part I played in this." Gabriel looked at her, this woman who had rejected him, who had called him incomplete, who had ultimately chosen redemption over pride. "You stood for truth when it mattered. That's all the forgiveness anyone needs." She nodded, tears tracking down her carefully composed face, and walked away. Gabriel watched her go and felt something like pity. She had won nothing today except the right to rebuild herself into someone better. It was not a small thing, but it was a lonely one. The year that followed was perhaps the happiest of Gabriel's life, which was saying something given the losses he had endured. They moved from Mrs. Kim's boarding house to a small house on the edge of town, purchased with money Gabriel earned through his rapidly expanding carpentry business. Word had spread about the crippled craftsman who built things better than anyone else, and suddenly people were willing to look past the wheelchair to see the skilled hands that operated it. Rachel and Gabriel were married in the spring, a simple ceremony at Father O'Brien's church with half the town in attendance. Billy served as best man, his chest puffed with pride. Emma was flower girl, speaking clearly now, the trauma-induced silence finally broken by love and safety. Michael toddled down the aisle, scattering petals and laughter in equal measure. Marcus Webb gave the bride away, since Rachel had no family left. Mrs. Kim baked a cake that became legendary in Silverpine history. And Victoria Ashford, who had sold her ranch and moved to Helena to start over, sent a letter of congratulations, along with a generous gift for the Children's Education Fund. Billy learned to read at a level that impressed even Miss Harrison. He wanted to be a teacher someday, he said, so he could help other children the way Gabriel had helped him. Emma discovered a talent for drawing her pictures, covering the walls of their small house, and Michael, growing fast and fearless, had appointed himself Gabriel's assistant, following his papa everywhere and insisting on helping with every project, even when his help was more hindrance. On a summer evening, one year after the hearing, Gabriel sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset over the Montana mountains. Rachel sat beside him, her hand in his, her head resting on his shoulder. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm air. It was ordinary and beautiful and more than Gabriel had ever dared hope for after Sarah died. "Do you ever think about how it all happened?" Rachel asked quietly. "How you got off that train expecting one thing and ended up with something completely different?" Gabriel watched Billy teaching Emma how to throw a ball, watched Michael toddle after them, trying to keep up, and felt the weight of Rachel's presence beside him. "I think about it every day, about how rejection brought me here, about how losing Sarah led me to you and the children. I don't believe everything happens for a reason, but I believe we can create reason from what happens to us. We can build meaning from chaos. Is that what we did, built meaning? We built a family. We built a life. We proved that wholeness has nothing to do with the body and everything to do with the heart. And if a broken man in a wheelchair can teach people that, then maybe every rejection I faced every time someone called me insufficient, maybe it was all worth it to get here." Rachel lifted her head to look at him. "You're not broken, Gabriel. You never were. The world was broken for not seeing what you could do. Maybe we're both right. Maybe I was broken and the world was wrong. Maybe that's how healing works. Not by pretending we're not damaged, but by proving that damaged things can still be beautiful." They sat in silence for a while, watching their children play, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And Gabriel thought about the morning he had rolled off that train into rejection, about the woman who had called him incomplete, about the children on an auction block waiting to be separated. He thought about all the ways this could have gone differently. If he had taken Victoria's money and left, if he had not seen the auction, if he had been too afraid to act, if Rachel had not trusted him, if Billy had not been brave enough to speak in court, if Victoria had not found the courage to choose redemption, if enough people had not been willing to stand against corruption. There were 1,000 ways this story could have ended in tragedy, but somehow through luck or grace or the stubborn refusal of broken people to stay broken, it had ended here, in love, in family, in the kind of wholeness that comes not from perfection, but from choosing each other day after day, despite all the reasons not to. Billy ran up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Papa, can you help me build a fort tomorrow? A real one with walls and a roof." Gabriel smiled. "Of course, son. We'll start after breakfast." "And can Emma and Michael help too?" "Absolutely. Family projects are the best kind." Billy threw his arms around Gabriel's neck in the unself-conscious way of children who have never learned to doubt that affection will be returned. "I love you, Papa." Gabriel held his son close, breathing in the smell of summer grass and child sweat, and the particular scent that was uniquely Billy. "I love you too, son, more than you'll ever know." As the sun finished its descent, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Gabriel Porter looked at his wife and his children and his home and understood that he had found what every broken thing searches for, not restoration to what was lost, but transformation into something new. Not a return to the past, but a leap into a future worth fighting for. They called him broken once, called him insufficient and incomplete and less than whole. But sitting on that porch with his family around him, Gabriel knew the truth that would echo through the rest of his long and happy life. Wholeness is not about what you have. It is about what you build with what you are given. And love, real love, is the strongest foundation any broken thing could hope to stand on. The evening deepened into night. The children were called inside for baths and bedtime stories. Rachel went in to help them, leaving Gabriel alone on the porch for a moment, looking at the stars. And somewhere in heaven, if such a place existed, Gabriel liked to think that Sarah looked down and smiled. Not with sadness for what had been lost, but with joy for what had been found. Because love does not end. It simply changes form, transforms into something new, lives on in the hearts of those who refuse to let brokenness be the final word. Gabriel wheeled himself inside to help with bedtime, to read stories and tuck in children and kiss his wife goodnight. To live the ordinary, beautiful life that he had fought so hard to win. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys and sorrows. But tonight, in a small house in Montana, with the people he loved sleeping safely under his protection, Gabriel Porter was whole. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.